After experiencing Ghost of Tsushima, I gave it a standing ovation for minutes. This game captivated me not only with its story, but also with its deeply designed combat mechanics, seamless animation transitions, Kurosawa-inspired aesthetics, and breathtaking landscapes. I realized Ghost of Tsushima would offer me an incredible aesthetic experience the moment I saw its main menu. The storm clouds filled with lightning symbolized the impending tempest, representing the wrath of the Mongols, while a katana embedded among reed stalks represents the samurai or ronin waiting to fight them. The background music and sound of thunder not only enhance the charisma of the protagonist, but also instill a sense of dread toward the Mongols. If the main menu alone evoked such powerful emotions in me, I couldn't wait to see what feelings the game itself would bring. From the opening segment of Ghost of Tsushima, you realize it promises a great gaming experience. For example, I've never seen another game where the Mongols are used as the main antagonists, even though they fill half, if not more, of our history books with their actions and the consequences thereof. History should always be approached with skepticism because it is written by humans. When we look at Mongol history in general, we see a people and leader who burned everything in their path and knew no bounds in cruelty. Of course, since I don't know much about Mongol history, I'm only judging based on what I've watched and read. If someone says, "Hey, the Mongols weren't like that," I'd reply, "All right, fair enough." Anyway, while the way the game tells the Mongol story can be debated, the presentation of the narrative is undeniably impressive. For example, the Mongols, who terrorize the world, launch an invasion of Japan's Tsushima Island, a historical event where the Mongols did indeed invade Tsushima and massacre its people. Khotun Khan, the nephew of Kublai Khan and grandson of Genghis Khan, makes his presence felt with all his terror and nobility. Later, a brave samurai steps forward to face him and is burned alive, a tactic used by the Mongols at the time to instill fear. Witnessing this samurai's death, others charge at the Mongols, and that's where our game begins. We charge toward the Mongols under a fiery rain of arrows, trying to survive on the battlefield while also savoring the chaos the game presents. The opening of Ghost of Tsushima reminded me of God of War 3. In that game, we also started with an action-packed sequence, only to lose everything by the end and struggle to climb back to the top. Similarly, here, after being gravely wounded, we start the game having lost everything. Our goal becomes regaining our former strength, rising from the ashes, and ultimately stopping Khotun Khan. The slower-paced sequence following the action-packed introduction didn't bore me because witnessing the burning village and the massacre of our people by the Mongols was deeply impactful. The combination of an action-filled opening and the ensuing devastation was crafted as strikingly as possible. These moments give players a clear understanding of what Ghost of Tsushima has to offer and firmly establish its high quality. You know how some works make you want to straighten your posture in admiration because their charisma leaves such a profound impression on you? Ghost of Tsushima is one of those works. However, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where Ghost of Tsushima truly excels early on. By the time we reach the end of the game, it becomes clear that its combat mechanics are among the best. Throughout the game, we need to adapt our stances depending on the enemies we face. What makes a samurai or ronin great is how well they master their stances. The sword is the soul of a samurai, and if the soul becomes corrupted, so does the sword. In Ghost of Tsushima's combat system, we don't rely on a single stance. Instead, we transition between them, creating a unique synergy. This approach succeeds in making players feel like a true samurai or ronin. Personally, when fighting enemies, I felt like Ryunosuke from the film The Sword of Doom. I would feign dropping my guard, wait for the enemy to make a move, and strike them down when they least expected it. We don't defeat enemies simply by mashing a series of buttons. If that were the case, a 30-hour game would quickly become repetitive, and there would be no need to master the combat system. By rotating the analog stick, we control the direction of our sword, enriching our combos. The game involves players with a multitude of mechanics, and the ability to seamlessly transition between them is a feat worthy of applause. Switching rapidly between explosives, ghost weapons, and stances ensures that each battle feels distinct. Depending on the behavior and number of enemies, we can create different synergies using these tools. If we were to rank the best games for playing with a gamepad, Ghost of Tsushima would undoubtedly take the top spot. Thanks to the face buttons and the right trigger, we can effortlessly switch stances during combat. Similarly, transitioning between ghost weapons, bombs, and the bow feels seamless. At first, frequently changing styles doesn't overwhelm the player because the game introduces mechanics gradually. By the time we've unlocked all abilities, we've already become accustomed to switching quickly between them. Using the D-pad, we can swap items, play the flute while on horseback, and more. Designing a multitude of mechanics and prioritizing practicality within them is no small feat. When we look at Sucker Punch's portfolio, their success in this regard isn't surprising, as they had already proven themselves with the infamous series. We can see the director's strong sense of aesthetics in many details. Let's start with the combat mechanics. For instance, the death animations of enemies, our character's finishing moves, the different ways Jin cleans blood off his katana before sheathing it. These are all details that caught my attention. The variety in these animations alone reflects the meticulous care put into the game. The animation transitions in Tsushima are flawless. During combat, there are no immersion-breaking delays or split-second lags that disrupt the visual flow. Jin swings his katana with incredible fluidity, and transitions between mechanics are equally seamless. This ensures that battles are consistently enjoyable. Even Red Dead Redemption 2 doesn't achieve this level of animation fluidity. Though to be fair, RDR2 excels in areas where it chooses to focus its strengths. Sucker Punch and Insomniac, studios that have mastered the open-world adventure genre and combat mechanics, are highly ambitious when it comes to animation transitions. One of the reasons we can play their games without getting bored or feel compelled to earn their platinum trophies is the seamless flow and aesthetic of these animations. There are some games, despite being excellent, that we just don't feel like returning to. For instance, Metro Exodus achieved great things, but it never managed to instill in me that urge to come back. Of course, I'll delve into why this is the case in detail in my Metro Exodus video. On the contrary, it was the opposite with The Last of Us. It's set in a post-apocalyptic, grim world, yet I always felt like returning to it. I never had the feeling of, let's just finish this and be done with it. This is directly related to how the scenes are presented to the player. In Ghost of Tsushima, the aesthetic pleasure it constantly feeds us creates lasting impressions. When we are away from the game, we remember the combat scenes, the animations, the effects, and the sounds, and we long to return. One detail in the game that I found clever and commendable is related to the camera perspective. Your character is not positioned in the center of the screen, but slightly to the left. Some players complained about this, but in my opinion, it was a brilliant choice. This positioning allows us to see the center more clearly and fully appreciate the scenery. In these moments, Jin and Nobu take a back seat, and the visual feast of the landscapes comes to the forefront. During action sequences, the character we control becomes inactive, and the camera pulls back, just like in the Batman Arkham series. This is because what matters here is not what the character is doing, but how the enemies are being defeated. The focus is on the action itself. Thanks to the technique of placing Jin and Nobu to the left, we rarely miss anything. Scenes are never chaotic or confusing. Had Jin and Nobu been positioned in the center of the screen, the rapid animations might have caused us to lose track of many details. Riding a horse while playing the flute and enjoying the scenery feels uniquely different in this game because of these thoughtful choices. Enemy reactions, death animations, finishing moves, and the way Jin cleanses his blade start to become repetitive after the 10th hour of gameplay. However, for such a long game, I think 10 hours is an ideal time before repetition sets in. The variety in animations reminded me a lot of the combat mechanics in the Batman Arkham series. There, too, the animations adapt to the character's stance, ensuring that the combat never feels repetitive. The impact effects and sound design were meticulously crafted. In fact, I'll be making a dedicated video on why the combat mechanics in the Arkham series feel so satisfying. Anyway, much like the Arkham series, the character in Ghost of Tsushima performs different finishing moves based on their position and the attacks they execute. However, when it comes to finishing off enemies crawling on the ground, it's always the same animation, stabbing the sword into their back or torso. The sense of impact is enhanced through various effects and sound cues. For instance, there are 3 ways to parry attacks. 1. Basic parry. The enemy attacks and you block without taking damage. 2. Good parry. If you time your block just as the enemy strikes, you stagger them. 3. Perfect parry. As the name suggests, a perfectly timed parry not only breaks the enemy's posture but also deals significant damage. In Ghost of Tsushima, posture refers to the enemy's guard. To reduce their health, we must first break their guard. The posture bar is displayed as such and varies from enemy to enemy. On the other hand, stance is a position that allows us to defeat different types of enemies more easily. For example, to break the posture of shielded enemies, we must either parry their attacks perfectly or switch to the water stance and perform heavy attacks. All perfect parries and heavy attacks deal damage to the enemy's posture. With the exception of enemies' red attacks, all other attacks can be parried. However, blue attacks cannot be parried with simple timing. You must either execute a perfect parry or perform a specific counter. Of course, if you unlock the skill in the talent tree that automatically parries spear attacks, a different mechanic applies there. In conclusion, if Akira Kurosawa were to see these combat scenes, he would undoubtedly be moved, as Ghost of Tsushima has deeply understood and honored his legacy. The directors of the game have extensively drawn from Japanese culture and films to produce such a masterpiece. They've managed to captivate someone like me, who has only a modest interest in Japanese culture. As I've explained here, and will continue to discuss throughout this video, you'll see traces of Japanese culture and Kurosawa's influence. By the end, you'll understand how these elements were thoroughly explored in creating this work. One of the details I really liked about the combat mechanics was how enemies reacted to fear. Fear didn't always cause them to flee. Sometimes it made them even more enraged. To scare them off, we had to execute a series of well-timed moves. For example, if our last hit on an enemy was a special attack, if we set them on fire, or if we perfectly parried an enemy's attack, and managed to chain these actions together, even the largest foes would flee or crawl away without looking back. However, leaders in the game aren't affected by fear. To deal with them, we need to activate Ghost Stance. Switching to Ghost Stance isn't easy, but certain armor pieces and charms can help fill the bar more quickly. If we manage to find their leader in the heart of the camp and assassinate him from behind, we can strike fear into the hearts of their soldiers by beheading him, which instantly fills our ghost bar. I must say, I found the Ghost Stance mechanic to be quite impressive. There are several reasons for this. First, as soon as we enter this stance, the screen darkens, and every time we strike an enemy, the screen turns red. The redness of the screen as we cut down foes, their screams, the splattering blood, and the sight of terrified enemies watching us in fear evoke epic emotions. The scene where we acquire this ability is already quite striking. The background music, the way enemies are slaughtered while others watch in terror, and some crawling away as Jin Sakai ascends to the pinnacle of samurai mastery are all immensely impactful. Ghost Stance immediately reminded me of the Rage of Sparta mechanic in the God of War series. There, too, Kratos would temporarily go berserk, take no damage, regenerate health, and deal immense damage. Here, we don't take damage because enemies don't even dare to strike us. Instead of merely dealing damage, we cut them down effortlessly. Ultimately, Ghost Stance is both visually stunning and a powerful way to emphasize Jin's fury as enemies fall before him. In addition to our katana and dagger, we also have a bow. This mechanic isn't just for show, it's something we use frequently. Archers in particular encourage us to rely on this weapon. However, it's not limited to dealing with archers. Charging enemies can be taken down with a single headshot. If the enemies aren't wearing helmets, even the largest among them will fall with one shot. Thanks to the ability to slow down time, we can easily handle swarms of enemies rushing at us without much effort. Making good use of the environment also allows us to deal with enemies swiftly. The environmental details make it clear that the game isn't solely about melee combat. Much like the Dishonored series, we first analyze the surroundings and then plan our approach accordingly. The fact that every camp has certain weaknesses demonstrates how much thought has been put into their design. Instead of entering through the front gate, we often infiltrate through a ledge or a small gap. Except for duels, we can defeat all enemies using stealth mechanics, and ghost weapons are particularly helpful in this regard. This mechanic can also be supported with charms, armor, and upgrades. Some games include stealth mechanics, but fail to design their environments around them. In contrast, the camps in this game are clearly designed with stealth gameplay in mind. However, playing exclusively stealthy would be an injustice to the game, as its combat mechanics are even more refined and offer players more impactful experiences. Even if the game didn't have a story, simply raiding camps and engaging in intense battles with enemies would be more than enough. The story and missions essentially serve as tools to facilitate combat and showcase the stunning landscapes. The true purpose here is to present the combat mechanics and visuals to the player. As enjoyable as the combat mechanics are, they do have a few flaws. For instance, I would have liked more gore effects. Yes, we're wielding a katana, a refined and elegant weapon, and its elegance is reflected in the blood flowing from enemies. However, it would have been great to have critical strikes that dismember enemies, allowing us to sever limbs. As it stands, only arms and heads can be severed. It would have been even more immersive if enemies' clothing tore apart and sword wounds were visible on their bodies, much like in samurai films. Solely relying on facial expressions and sound effects feels somewhat lacking. For example, we have bombs, and with these, we could tear our enemies apart. While fighting them, we could inflict wounds on anyone in our path using our katana, and the injured enemy could try to fight us while clutching their wound. This could make the determination of some enemies to stay alive more impactful for us. There could be a blood loss mechanic. For instance, Red Dead Redemption 2 had such a feature, where enemies, despite losing blood, would still confront us, stumble, and so on. The Aido moments in the game, or sword duels, might become repetitive, but before discussing their downsides, it's worth highlighting their positive aspects. The Aido is the Japanese counterpart of the standoffs we see in Western movies. Sergio Leone successfully incorporated these Aido techniques, along with other Kurosawa-inspired elements, into American culture. For example, the tumbleweed rolling between two duelists in a standoff represents Kurosawa's wind. The music during the game's duels feels like a nod to spaghetti Western films. Just as the faster draw wins in Aido, the same applies to standoffs with guns. These mechanics are fun at first, but they start to feel dull once you become familiar with enemy movements. Sure, with certain skills, we can take down many enemies before even engaging in combat through Aido, but I would have liked to see more variety here. For instance, the environment could be very dusty, or lots of leaves could fall in front of us, making it harder to see the opponent. Some enemies could cheat, although they already have some deceptive moves here. For example, dagger-wielding enemies act like they're about to attack but don't. Enemies in the surroundings could do more to distract us instead of just standing idly. They could cheer or fake reactions like shouting, "Oh, he's about to strike." Toward the later stages of the game, enemies start to become faster, and their waiting and feinting times increase. But this wasn't enough in terms of variety. Yes, holding down the button and drawing the sword at the right moment is a well-thought-out mechanic, but considering how often we use it before every fight, I expected it to be developed further. So, how are these different from the others? Boss fight duels are longer and don't end with a single strike like the regular ones. Before the fight begins, the sword remains sheathed, and the deathmatch starts only when Jin attempts to draw his sword. Boss fights take the gaming experience to its peak. Our reflexes become ineffective against such intense scenes, and our eyes become more active than ever before. The real challenge here isn't the bosses, it's the distracting surroundings. Every boss already has a specific attack pattern, so we usually get accustomed to their patterns by the second fight. I expected them to focus more on the boss battles. For instance, each character could have had a unique fighting style, as samurai films often emphasize the importance of style. Yes, some bosses, like the mythic ones, had distinct attack patterns, but only about 4 or 5 bosses stood out this way. The rest were the same. If most of them are going to be similar, then design fewer but more refined bosses. So, which was the best fight among these? In my opinion, the duel with Lady Masako was the best. It was an incredible scene where you fight her while marveling at the scenery, all the while hearing Masako's words and the Mongols' war cries. You realize their approach not just from the sounds, but also from the arrows falling in front of you. It was undoubtedly one of the most epic moments in the game. If there's one mechanic that oversimplified the game, it's resolve. The more we fight enemies, the faster our resolve meter fills up. We can increase its amount and recharge speed through events, skills, armor, and charms. While this encourages us to engage in combat, relying too heavily on this mechanic makes us interact with enemies recklessly, attacking them without much thought. Toward the middle of the game, various enemy types are mixed together and thrown at us, increasing the difficulty. Yet our reliance on resolve remains undiminished. As we die repeatedly, we start to notice how the game conditions us to be lazy. As the story progresses, we encounter different types of enemies. For example, in the second act of the game, we face enemies wielding flaming swords, while toward the final act, we deal with archers shooting poisoned arrows. I'd say the variety of enemies is well done because it allows for creating different synergies. Various enemy types are combined in unique ways and unleashed upon us, forcing us to adopt different fighting styles each time. The Straw Hat Ronin, in particular, truly test our patience and skills. They stand out from the others. For example, they can parry our attacks and don't just charge in recklessly like the rest. They wield the katana almost as skillfully as we do. Besides these, predators can also irritate the player, but their variety was quite limited. For example, throughout the game, I only fought against bears and dogs. Dogs in games are notoriously annoying. From the Soulsborne games to the Resident Evil series, we've always had our share of trouble with dogs. While battling a challenging boss can be enjoyable, dealing with dogs usually isn't. At the start of the game, fighting them can be frustrating because one sneaks up on you from an unexpected place, distracts you, and causes you to take significant damage from other enemies during the chaos. Other small but impactful details in the combat mechanics that enhance the feeling of landing hits include realistic weapon sounds, especially the clash of swords, the satisfying animations when breaking an enemy's posture, the slowing down of time with sound effects, and the katana's ability to cut precisely rather than excessively. Some games fail at this because they feature litters of blood spilling and splashing everywhere, and enemies' reactions to sword wounds feel exaggerated. The facial expressions and reactions of enemies, as well as how the character and enemies' appearances change according to the environment, are also noteworthy. For example, if we fight in the mud, our character and others end up covered in it. If there's a lot of blood, our character becomes stained with it. The way the character and others hold their swords is highly realistic. Similar to how Kurosawa used real swords in his films, the characters feel like they're wielding actual weapons. Switching between stances to enrich combos, enemies knowing where to position themselves, trying to surround us trying to exploit or create openings. These small details combined make us feel like true samurai or ronin. All of this makes Ghost of Tsushima's combat mechanics worthy of a standing ovation.